This house was originally bought for $375,000, but later resold for just 35 grand. So the owner lost 90% of their money, and that's just one of 7 homes that are practically worthless now. And what you'll see throughout this video is that these homes aren't bargains, they're warnings. So let's count down the 7 houses that lost hundreds of thousands of dollars so that by the end you'll know the warning signs to look for before you buy your next property. Number 1 are potential leaky homes, ones with monolithic and direct fix cladding, because this 5-bedroom home in South Auckland was worth around $1.5 million, but sold for just $900,000, $600,000 less than the CV. What made it so cheap? Well, it's what it's made out of. You see, a lot of people talk about leaky homes in New Zealand, but don't really know what it means. Between 1988 and 2004, thousands of Kiwi homes went up that turned out to be leaky. They were mainly plaster homes, but it wasn't the plaster that meant that the water got in. Instead, it was how we were building the homes back then. And it was a perfect storm of poor building. First, you need to know that plaster is porous, so water can pass through it. But that wasn't the only issue. It's that the plaster backed straight onto the internal structure that was keeping the house up. And the houses were being held up by untreated wood. So when the paint got chipped on the outside of the building, water started touching the plaster, the water went through the plaster, and the plaster was touching this wood, and the wood began to rot, and the house began to crumble. So the inside walls started to look like Weet-Bix. Now, a lot of building materials are porous, like brick. Water can pass through brick. Water touches the outside, it goes through. But the way we build our houses today is different. We have a gap, what's called a cavity, between the outside of your house, whether it's made out of plaster or brick, and the internal structure, so that when water gets through, it just drains down and goes straight back out. But to take the plaster off this house and put up a new exterior, what's called cladding, whether it's going to be plaster or brick, it could cost anywhere from $150,000 to $600,000, which is why when buyers look at them, they take that into account, making these properties practically worthless, at least compared to what the property would otherwise be worth. Number 2 are leasehold properties. This family bought a property near Cornwall Park in Green Lane. Now, it's a beautiful house right next to one of the best parks in Auckland. They got this bungalow for what seemed like a steal, $375K. But the thing you need to know about leaseholds is you don't own the land. You pay ground rent to the landowner every year for the privilege of renting the dirt underneath your own house. And here's the problem. That ground rent typically gets reviewed every 7 to 21 years. And when that happens, this property's ground rent went from about $2,000 a year to over 30 grand a year. Now, when that ground rent is cheap, your property is worth more. When the ground rent is really expensive, that makes the value of your property go down because anyone who buys it can see the ongoing liability it comes with. And these guys weren't alone. Another owner nearby watched her ground rent go from $8,300 a year all the way up to just a touch under 74 grand in a single review. They ended up walking away from the house entirely. Now, they'd paid 450 grand to buy it at the start, but for them, it was actually worthless in the end. So before you fall for a cheap asking price, just check if it's leasehold. And I know I keep talking about it on the channel, but I'm going to stop complaining about leaseholds when Kiwis stop buying them. And if you are planning to invest in property, hopefully this shows just how much there is to look for, which is why I've got a team whose sole job is to go out looking for high quality new build properties for Kiwis to invest in. And if you want help investing in property, your first step is to book a free portfolio planning session with one of my financial advisors. I'll drop the link down in the description. Number 3 are coastal homes where the land is literally disappearing. This is where a batch by the beach can turn your Kiwi dream into an absolute nightmare. Because in some spots around New Zealand, the land is literally being lost to the sea, with homeowners putting up walls for the waves to crash into to protect their homes. This home in the Hawke's Bay was bought in 1997 for 160 grand. It sold in 2018 for $135,000, $25K less than the owner paid, but that was 20 years earlier. Put that into context, the average home in the area was banking a $200,000 capital gain, and this family swallowed a $25,000 loss. And it's all because around New Zealand, the ocean is slowly reclaiming some of the land. And as councils and insurers start to map these zones and get really smart, insurance gets more expensive and sometimes impossible to get. And if you sell the property and the buyer can't get insurance, that means they often can't get a mortgage either. And if they can't get a mortgage, that means there are way fewer buyers who are going to buy your property. Fewer buyers means your $800,000 batch could be worth whatever the council is willing to pay you to leave, which is often not much. So 2 checks before you go near a coastal property. 1, order the LIM report to see what the council says about the property, and then make sure you can get insurance before you go unconditional. If the insurance premiums come back and they are astronomical, it tells you something about that property. Number 4 are as-is, where-is homes, and these are mostly down in Christchurch that are still carrying damage from the 2010 and 2011 earthquakes. This 4-bedroom home in a pretty posh Christchurch suburb on paper should be worth over $2 million. It sold for nearly $700,000 less. Now, why so low? Because it was earthquake damaged and left uninsured. You know the chain reaction by now. No insurance means no mortgage from the banks, no lending means cash buyers only, and that smaller buyer pool means a lower price. Now here's the bright spot. A lot of these owners aren't quite the victims you might assume. Many took a cash payout from the insurer, decided they didn't want the stress of repairing their house, so they've pocketed the money and sold the house as is. It's the buyer then who takes on the risk. But I do worry about some of the fixes going on, because after the quakes, thousands of homes were repaired, signed off, and then sold on. But plenty of those new owners later found out that the repairs were dodgy, they were inadequate. Cracks were papered over, piles propped up instead of properly redone. And it got so bad that the government ended up standing up a $300 million fund for people who unknowingly bought a badly repaired home. But it turned out that the fund was so badly needed that the costs ballooned to over $700 million, and the fund is now closed to new applications. So I wouldn't be surprised if 10 or 15 years from now, we're still talking about dodgy quake repairs the same way that we talk about leaky homes today. Now, I hope that I'm wrong, but it's a risk I'd want to price in. Number 5 are tiny apartments, anything under about 38 square meters. They look like the perfect entry point. A studio in central Auckland for $250K rented to a student. The yield could look great on paper, but here's what no one tells you. Generally in New Zealand, you need a 20% deposit if you're buying a property as your own home or a new build investment property, or you need a 30% deposit if you're going to buy an existing property. And what a lot of people don't realize is that most banks need you to have at least a 50% deposit if the property is less than 35 to 40 square meters. So when you go to sell, your buyer pool is going to be very small because that's a lot of deposit. And the numbers actually back it up. In early 2026, 41% of all apartment resales in the country were sold at a loss. The average loss in Auckland was 77 grand for an apartment. Now, I don't mean to talk down about apartments too much, but sometimes these issues start stacking on top of each other. As I mentioned at the start, this unit in Auckland was sold for 375 grand in 2005. It later resold for just $35,000, 90% of the value gone. Now, in this case, not only is the apartment leaky, it was also on leasehold land. So bad property decisions can mess with you and make you lose $340,000. Meanwhile, if you just bought the average property, you could have made hundreds of thousands of dollars if your property followed the rest of the market. And if this is saving you from a potentially bad buy, do me a quick favor, hit the like button, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. That's how I know which videos to make more of. Number 6 are retirement village units, the one that Kiwis buy to live out their later years. But financially, it can be one of the most costly financial decisions you make, and I'll tell you why. Let's say mum and dad buy a retirement unit for $650,000, except they didn't. They didn't buy that retirement unit because when you move in and feel like you're buying a property in a retirement village, you're not actually buying the property. Instead, you're buying a license to occupy it. So you've bought the right to live there, and you've paid the same price as if you were going to buy a house without actually buying the property itself. And this is the model that about 95% of villages use. And here's the real issue I see. If 5 years on, mum and dad, they move into the hospital part of the retirement village, the village takes a deferred management fee, usually 20 to 30% of the price. So that could easily be 160K gone. And then you as a family get back, what's that, about $480,000, $490,000 in that example. But the part that really stings is that if the property market rose 20% over those 5 years, the retirement village might resell that same unit for $780K after a quick reno. The family doesn't see a cent of that gain. The retirement village gets to keep it because mum and dad, they never owned the property. They just bought the right to live there for a bit. And it actually gets worse. The family often doesn't get paid until the village resells that unit. I mean, this family, they were left waiting years to get their money out. Of course, every contract is a bit different, but the shape often is similar. You're not actually buying a property, and it annoys me that retirees are paying the same price as a house to buy these retirement units, which turns out you're not even buying the house. And that brings us to number 7 on our list. I think this one could be the sneakiest of the lot. These are properties with body corporates that have maintenance issues, but no money to fix it. Right now in Parnell, in a reasonably posh suburb in Auckland, owners in this development are considering selling their homes for around 150 grand each. And it's because the buildings are leaky, the repair bill that blew out to around $29 million, and the builder collapsed partway through. One elderly owner said that she was asked to hand over $20,000 that she didn't have. She wants to sell, but she can't even get a key to her own unit. And here's the trap. When you buy a unit title property, you're on the hook with every other owner in that development. If the body corporate votes to spend 50 grand a unit fixing the cladding, you're paying 50 grand whether you agree or not, depending on the constitution. So before you buy any property with a body corporate, read the body corporate minutes cover to cover. If there's a whiff of pending litigation, deferred maintenance, or an argument about weather tightness, that is your warning sign. So that's the 7 properties that were bought for potentially a lot of money and sold years later for a lot less. And even though the building code has improved over time, you really need to know that even if you buy a brand new property, there can still be issues, which is why you should never buy a new build until you watch this video. Click the video on your screen and I'll see you in there.